All right, ready to dive into the world of learning English as a second language?
That's good.
We're going to go way beyond textbooks today. You're going to discover some practical strategies you can use, strategies that can really boost your spoken English. And we're working from this guide that's all about taking action, perfect for anyone ready to move past theory and start speaking with more confidence.
I think what's really interesting about this guide is that it really emphasizes a mindset shift. It's about moving from just studying English to actually living it.
Exactly, and it all starts with understanding how important consistent practice is. The guide hits on the idea of speaking every day, even if it's just to yourself. I have to admit I was a little skeptical at first.
Oh, yeah?
But then I remembered how many times I've practiced presentations or speeches in front of the mirror, even though English is my native language. It's a skill we all work on.
It's true. And what's fascinating is how we learn our first language, through constant exposure and interaction. Yet we tend to approach learning a second language very differently.
Yeah.
We get bogged down in textbooks and grammar rules. This guide encourages us to tap back into that natural learning process through immersion.
It really does. There's a whole section on going beyond textbooks. Things like watching movies and listening to music in English.
And that's where active listening comes in. It's not just passively hearing the language, it's about paying attention to pronunciation, intonation, and how words and phrases are used in context. Think about watching a movie you love in English with subtitles. Then as you get comfortable with the dialogue, challenge yourself to turn the subtitles off for a bit. It's a small step, but it can have a big impact on your listening comprehension.
You know, I've tried that with a few foreign films, and it's amazing how much more you pick up when you're really focused on the audio. Speaking of getting comfortable, what about vocabulary? This guide talks about learning new words every day, which sounds a little intimidating, right?
Yeah, it can seem daunting. But it's about quality over quantity. Instead of trying to memorize lists of random words, focus on choosing a few words each day. Words that are relevant to your interests or goals. For example, if you're learning English for travel, you might focus on words related to transportation, accommodation, and dining. Or if you're a music lover, pick out some interesting words from your favorite English songs and try using them in conversations throughout the day.
That's a much more manageable approach. It's like weaving vocabulary learning into your daily life, rather than treating it as a separate chore. But even with the right vocabulary, I think a lot of people struggle with feeling confident when speaking English.
Absolutely. And the guide addresses this head-on with some great tips. One that might seem counterintuitive is speaking slowly and clearly. We often think that speaking quickly makes us sound more fluent. But the truth is, slowing down can actually project more confidence. It gives you time to think, breathe, and articulate your words properly.
It's like you're in control of the conversation, not rushing to get the words out. The guide also mentions practicing in front of a mirror, which I have to admit I thought was a bit cheesy at first. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. It's a way to get used to seeing yourself speaking English, observing your facial expressions and mouth movements, and making adjustments to your pronunciation. Plus, it's a low-pressure environment where you can experiment and make mistakes without judgment.
It really is about getting comfortable with the physical act of speaking English. Think of it like practicing any other skill. Athletes practice their movements. Musicians practice their instruments. Why not practice speaking? Each small step you take, whether it's practicing in the mirror or using a new word in a conversation, it all builds your confidence over time.
And that brings us to what might be the most challenging, but potentially the most rewarding advice in the guide: thinking in English. I think a lot of learners, myself included, get stuck in the habit of translating everything in our heads, which can be a real roadblock to fluency.
It absolutely can. Mental translation slows you down, makes it difficult to speak naturally. This guide suggests trying to train your brain to think directly in English, which I know sounds like a big leap.
Yeah.
But the idea is that the more you practice thinking in the language, the more accessible words and phrases will become, leading to faster, more fluent speech. It's like switching your brain's operating system in a way.
Okay, I'm intrigued. But how does someone actually start doing that? I mean, it's not like flipping a switch, right?
Right, it's a gradual process. Start with something small, like mentally narrating your daily routine in English. Describe what you're doing, seeing, and feeling. As you get more comfortable, you can start forming more complex thoughts and internal monologues in English.
So it's about gradually building up that English thinking muscle a little bit each day? I like that. And you know, it ties back to what we were talking about earlier with immersion. The more you surround yourself with the language, the easier it becomes to think in it too.
Exactly, it's all connected. And what's fascinating is that when you start to think in English more often, It can actually change the way you perceive the world. You start to notice nuances in the language that you might have missed before.
That's incredible. It's like unlocking a whole new level of understanding and appreciation for the language.
It really is.
Wow.
It really does open up new perspectives. And it brings us to another point this guide makes about using storytelling to practice your English.
Oh, that's one of my favorite tips. It's so much more engaging than just repeating vocabulary drills. Whether you're telling a true story from your life or making something up, it forces you to think about how to structure a narrative, use descriptive language, and really hold someone's attention.
Right, and it taps into the power of emotion and personal connection, which can make the learning process so much more memorable and enjoyable. This guide also mentions the importance of using simplified language when you're first starting out. It's a reminder that it's okay to start with simple sentences and gradually build complexity as you progress.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like building a house. You start with a solid foundation and then add the details later. And speaking of foundations, what about the role of grammar? I know this guide focuses on practical speaking skills, but grammar is still important, right?
It absolutely is. But this guide takes a different approach to grammar than traditional textbooks. Instead of memorizing rules in isolation, it encourages learners to pick up grammar naturally, through exposure and practice. Think of it like learning the rules of a game by playing it, rather than just reading the rule book.
I like that analogy. It takes the pressure off of having to be perfect from the start. It's about understanding the patterns and structures of the language through real-world use. And speaking of real-world use, the guide also talks about not being afraid to make mistakes.
Oh, that's such a crucial point. Mistakes are inevitable when you're learning anything new. And language is no exception. In fact, mistakes are valuable learning opportunities. When you make a mistake, you become aware of a gap in your knowledge. And then you can focus on filling that gap.
It's like those aha moments you have when you finally figure something out. And this guide stresses that it's okay to ask for help when you need it. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you're actively engaged in the learning process.
Yeah, exactly. And there are so many resources available to help learners. From language exchange partners to online forums and apps, technology can play a huge role in language learning. It can provide access to a wealth of materials, interactive exercises, and personalized feedback. And of course, one of the best ways to practice is by connecting with other English speakers.
The guide specifically mentions joining an English-speaking group or club, either online or in person. I think that's brilliant, because it creates opportunities for real-world conversations and cultural exchange. It's one thing to be able to understand a textbook or a movie, but it's a whole other level to be able to hold a conversation with someone in real time.
It really is about taking your English skills out of the classroom and into the real world. And that brings us to one of the most important points the guide emphasizes: enjoying the process.
Yes, learning a new language can be challenging, but it should also be fun and rewarding. When you're enjoying yourself, you're more likely to stay motivated and make progress.
Absolutely. It's about celebrating the small victories along the way, embracing the challenges as opportunities for growth, and finding joy in the journey itself. And it brings us back to the core message of this guide. Speaking English is about so much more than just mastering grammar rules or memorizing vocabulary lists. It's about connecting with others, expressing yourself authentically, and opening up a world of possibilities.
I think that's beautifully put. It's about using language as a tool to build relationships, share ideas, and experience the world in new ways.
And it's about recognizing that language learning is a lifelong journey, full of twists and turns, ups and downs, but ultimately it's an incredibly rewarding experience that can enrich your life in countless ways.
I couldn't agree more. We've explored some fantastic tips and strategies from this guide, all centered around the idea that action, immersion, and enjoyment are key to becoming a confident English speaker. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with one final thought-provoking question. We've talked about so many different approaches, from practicing in the mirror to thinking in English, but what's one small step you can take today to incorporate these ideas into your English learning journey?
That's an excellent question. It could be something as simple as watching a short video in English without subtitles, or trying to use a new word in a conversation today. The important thing is to take action, even if it's a small step. And remember, every little bit of effort counts towards building your confidence and fluency.
Exactly. Don't let the fear of making mistakes hold you back. Embrace the journey, have fun, and watch your English skills soar.
It's all about taking those small steps and building momentum, and who knows, maybe someday you'll be the one sharing your own tips and strategies for learning English.
Oh, wow, that's a great point. Imagine going from language learner to language mentor. That's the power of consistent effort and a positive mindset.
Absolutely. And remember, the journey of learning a language is never truly over. There's always something new to discover, a new nuance to explore, a new connection to be made through language.
That's what makes it so exciting. It's a lifelong adventure that can take you to unexpected places and open your mind to new perspectives.
So keep exploring, keep practicing, keep that curiosity alive. And most importantly, have fun with it.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. We've covered so much ground today, from the importance of consistent practice and active listening to the power of thinking in English, and embracing mistakes as opportunities for growth. I hope this deep dive has left you feeling inspired and empowered to take your English speaking skills to the next level.
It's been a pleasure diving into these practical and insightful strategies with you. And to our listener, we wish you all the best on your language learning journey. Keep those conversations flowing.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.